Millions of people watched Judy Garland defeat the Wicked Witch of the West, but years later, Judy admitted the real witch wasn't on the movie set at all. She said it was her own mother, and when you find out what happened behind the scenes, you'll understand why. Judy Garland wasn't born into Hollywood. She was born into a family that lived for the stage. Long before she became one of the biggest stars in the world, there was her mother, Ethel Milne, a woman with dreams of fame that never quite came true. Ethel Marion Milne was born on the 17th of November, 1893, in Michigan, Michigan, a mining settlement so far north it was closer in spirit to the frozen edge of Canada than to anything most Americans pictured when they said the word Michigan. It was a place built on iron and coal, and the kind of hard weather that teaches people young that comfort is a thing you make yourself, if you can make it at all. Her father was a railroad man of Scottish-Canadian stock, a drinker, an argumentative sort, who did not believe much in God and said so, which in a small northern town in the 1890s was its own quiet act of defiance. Her mother had a strong will and a house full of children to aim it at. Ethel was the first of 8. It was a loud house and a musical one, which are not always the same thing. Somebody was usually singing, somebody was usually at the piano or scraping at a violin or making up entertainment out of whatever was lying around, because entertainment was cheap and the winters were long and there was not much else to do. The parents had even performed a little themselves in a medicine show, the traveling kind that sold tonic between songs. So Ethel came into a world where standing up in front of people and holding their attention was not a fancy dream reserved for special children. It was simply what the family did on a Tuesday. She soaked it up before she could have named it. Here is the thing the later story never quite says out loud, because it complicates the villain. Ethel was not the most gifted one in that crowded, tuneful house. Her brothers and sisters could outsing her. She knew it. What she had instead was everything else. She could sing a little, and dance a little, and play the piano well, and even write a song when she needed one. And above all, she could not be stopped. She was short and a bit stout, plain in the face, with dark eyes that people said sat slightly crossed. And none of it mattered, because when Ethel Milne decided she wanted a thing, she went at it with a relentlessness that made prettier and more talented people step out of her way. Obstinate, one word people used; unconquerable, another. She was the kind of person who mistakes wanting something badly enough for deserving it, and in show business sometimes for a while that is enough. By her late teens she had found her spot. She was down in Superior, Wisconsin, a rough port town on the cold lip of Lake Superior, playing piano in the dark of the movie theaters, accompanying the silent pictures as they flickered, and the live acts that filled the gaps between reels. Theaters like the Orpheum and the Lyric, where a girl who could read a room and follow a singer and hold a tempo was worth having around. It was not stardom. It was work, and it was near the light, and for Ethel near the light was the whole point. She was 20 years old, unmarried, plain, and absolutely sure that the stage was the only place worth being. And then a tenor walked in. His name was Francis Avant Gum, and everyone called him Frank, and he was, by every account that survives, a genuinely lovely man. He came from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, a southern boy with a warm baritone that could climb into a sweet tenor when a song asked for it, and a smile that one person who knew him described as spacious as summer's sun. Life had knocked him around early. His mother died when he was a child. The money got thin, and he might have gone nowhere at all, except that a wealthy godfather stepped in and paid for schooling, choir scholarships, a stretch at a military academy, and then years at the University of the South, where his voice got him invited to sing at every event that had a stage. He drifted out of school after his father died, worked as a court reporter to eat, and kept singing, because singing was the thing that made him feel like himself. By the time he crossed Ethel's path in Superior, he was managing theaters and performing in them, charming everyone, well-liked everywhere he went. He was also carrying something he could not talk about. Frank was drawn to men, in a country and a century that had no soft place for that at all, and the rumors followed him from town to town, and more than once. They were the reason he suddenly had to leave one town for the next. None of this was spoken plainly then. It moved as whispers, as the abrupt goodbye, as the reason a well-liked man kept starting over somewhere new. Ethel would have heard some of it. People always hear some of it. She married him anyway. Why would she? That is the first real question in this whole long story, and it matters, because the answer shows you. who Ethel was before she was anybody's wicked witch. She was a plain, driven, ambitious girl who had already been told in 100 small ways that the world was not going to hand her romance or beauty or an easy path. And here came a charming, talented, gentle man who could sing, who understood the theater the way she did, who could give her a life inside the light instead of beside it. Whatever Frank could or could not offer her in the ways a marriage is supposed to work, he could offer her a partnership in the only thing she truly loved. Two performers, running theaters together, making a life out of the stage. For a girl like Ethel, that may have looked less like settling and more like winning. They married on the 22nd of January, 1914, in the front parlor of her parents' house. She was about 20, he was 27. They honeymooned briefly and got straight to work, which was the truest thing about them. And before long, they had found their theater and their town. The town was Grand Rapids, Minnesota, a lumber place up in the North Woods, where the winters were serious and the pace was slow, and a family theater could be the beating heart of a whole community's week. Frank ran the new Grand Theater, which showed the silent pictures and hosted the live vaudeville acts that came through. And Ethel sat at the piano in the dark and played the whole world into being, the chases and the kisses and the tragedies, all of it coming out of her 10 fingers. They bought a 2-story white clapboard house with a garden, the kind of house that looks like the beginning of a happy story, and they set about filling it with children. The first was Mary Jane, born in 1915, later called Susan or Susie. The second was Dorothy Virginia, born in 1917, who somehow ended up with the nickname Jimmy. Both girls could sing, and both girls, almost as soon as they could stand, were put out on the stage of their father's theater to fill the time between the reels. This was not thought of as strange or cruel. It was the family business. The Gum Girls sang between the pictures, the way another family's children might have stacked cans in the family store. Ethel accompanied them on the piano. Frank beamed from the wings. The town loved it. And then on the 10th of June, 1922, the last one arrived, a third daughter. They named her Frances Ethel Gum, after both her father and her mother, and the family took to calling her Baby. And Baby is where the real story turns, because Baby was not like her sisters. Baby was the one. There is a detail from before she was even born that most telling skip, and it should not be skipped, because it hangs over everything that comes after. By the time Ethel was carrying her third child, the marriage was already strained, the money was tight, and a third mouth felt to Ethel less like a blessing and more like a weight. By some accounts, she considered not having the baby at all. Frank, troubled, went and asked a friend who was studying to be a doctor whether it could be done. In the end, they did not do it. They had the child, but the woman who would grow up to say that the only time she ever felt wanted was when she was performing had, before she drew a single breath, already been a question her parents were not sure how to answer. You do not have to believe a baby remembers such a thing to see. How a household that once wondered whether to keep you might raise you, in a way you feel in your bones for the rest of your life. She was by every account an astonishing child, not pretty in the doll-faced way the movies would later demand, but alive, with enormous dark eyes, and a voice that came out of that tiny body, like something borrowed from a grown woman. She started performing almost before she could talk. The famous moment came the day after Christmas in 1924, when she was 2.5 years old, put up on the stage of her father's theater, in a little white net dress her mother had sewn, to sing with her sisters. The older girls did their song and dance number, something bright and bouncy, about sugar walking down the street. And then Baby stepped up on her own and sang Jingle Bells. And she would not stop. She sang it and the little crowd went up. And she sang it again and they went up again. And she kept singing it, chorus after chorus, drunk on the sound of them wanting her, until her father finally had to walk out and scoop her up and carry her off the stage while she was still going. Picture that. A 2-year-old in a homemade dress, so lit up by the love coming out of the dark that a grown man had to physically remove her from the source of it. Everyone in that theater laughed and clapped and thought it was the most charming thing they had ever seen. Nobody in that theater understood that they were watching the whole tragedy in miniature, the entire shape of a life already set. The child had found the one place in the world where being wanted was simple and total and immediate. She would spend the next 45 years trying to get back into that light, and she would let almost anyone do almost anything to her as the price of admission. For a little while, it really was happy. This is the part the darker versions rush past, and it deserves its moment, because Judy herself never let go of it. Late in her life, looking back across everything that had happened to her, she said those first Minnesota years were terribly happy, possibly the only kind of normal, carefree time she ever had. That is a heavy sentence when you sit with it. The happiest she ever was, in a life that touched every glory show business had to offer, was before she was 5 in a small cold town, in a white house with a garden, singing between the movies, while her father laughed in the wings. The three sisters rehearsed on the staircase landing of the house, their voices braiding together on the way up the stairs. They played the new grand, and the little towns scattered across the northern part of the state, community halls and neighboring theaters, Ethel at the piano the whole time, keeping them in line, keeping them in tempo, already booking and arranging and steering. It was a family act in the oldest sense. Nobody was a star yet. The mother was not yet a monster. She was a driven stage-struck woman, doing what stage-struck families did, and her youngest could already stop a room, and everyone was, more or less, all right. You can still stand in some of it if you go up there. The little white house in Grand Rapids is a museum now, kept the way it was, the staircase where the girls harmonized, the rooms where a family lived before any of them knew what was coming. It is a strange, quiet place to visit, because you already know the ending, and they did not. In those rooms, it was still just a theater family in a lumber town, the father charming the neighbors, the mother at the piano, 3 little girls in homemade dresses, and the youngest one, baby, already able to do a thing. That stopped strangers in their seats. Nobody there was reaching for tragedy. They were reaching for a good life, a life inside the light. And for a little while, up in the cold in the pines, they had it. That is the part worth holding on to before the rest of the story takes it away. It was real, it was good, and it was almost over. But you cannot understand the mother without understanding what was quietly breaking the father. And what was breaking the father was the same thing that had chased him from town to town before he ever met Ethel. Frank Gum was a warm, decent, deeply liked man who was attracted to men and boys. And Grand Rapids was a small town, and small towns keep their secrets right up until the day they decide not to. The whispers that had trailed him across the years caught up. There were rumors, the kind that in that time and place could end a man. And by 1926, they had gathered enough weight that the family's position in Grand Rapids was no longer safe. There is no clean, single reason the Gums pulled up and left. There rarely is. Part of it was ambition. California was where the movies were being made, and the girls, especially the youngest, had something that a town of a few thousand people up in the pines could never fully use. And part of it plainly was escape. The trouble around Frank had become a reason to be somewhere else. So in June of 1926, when baby was 4 years old, the family packed up the White House and the garden and pointed themselves west toward Lancaster, California, out on the edge of the desert north of Los Angeles, close enough to Hollywood to feel its pull. The move looked like a beginning. It was really an ending. The one carefree stretch of Judy Garland's life closed with the closing of that Minnesota door. And it closed when she was 4, and it never opened again. Everything after this is the story of a family running toward the light and finding out town by town and year by year what the light costs. In Lancaster, Frank ran another theater because running theaters was the thing he knew. And the girls kept performing, and the act kept touring, and slowly the balance of the household began to shift. Frank was diminished out here. The rumors had followed the family west, softer now but never gone. And a man carrying that kind of secret in that kind of era learns to make himself smaller, to keep his head down, to let his wife handle the parts of life that require standing up in front of people and demanding things. And Ethel, who had never in her life been shy about demanding things, stepped forward to fill the space. She became the manager. She became the engine. She became the one who decided where the girls would sing, and when and for how much. And increasingly, she became the one who decided which of her daughters mattered most, because by now it was obvious Susie and Jimmy were good. Baby was something else. And a woman who had spent her whole life certain that she deserved more attention than her modest talent could earn, now found herself holding the most valuable talent she had ever been near. And it was not a rival or a co-star or a stranger. It was her own smallest child. What happened next is the heart of the accusation, and it is worth slowing all the way down for, because this is where the pushy stage mother of the postcard turns into something the postcard cannot hold. The act became the Gum Sisters, and then, because a man once introduced them to a laughing crowd as the Glum Sisters, and the name was clearly a problem, they took a new one and became the Garland Sisters. And Baby, growing up, shed the name Frances and took the name Judy for herself, out of a song she liked. But the name changes were the easy part. The hard part was the road. Ethel had them out constantly now, up and down California and beyond, into theaters and clubs and radio spots, and the occasional short film. Some of the rooms respectable, and some of them not. A few of them, the kind of joints that got raided. She drove them from booking to booking. She sat at the piano through every set. She negotiated the fees. She handled the men who ran the venues, and she pushed. She pushed the way she had always pushed at everything, except now the thing she was pushing was a small girl's body and a small girl's voice. Night after night after night, there is a quiet detail in the shape of the act that tells you where all of this was heading, and it is easy to miss because it happened so gradually. The act was supposed to be 3 girls. It became more and more one. Susie and Jimmy were good. They could carry a harmony and hold a step and please a small-town crowd. And for a while, the 3 of them together were the whole point. The Garland Sisters, a package. But Judy was not on their level, and everyone could hear it. The audiences first of all. And a mother with Ethel's instinct for where the value sat did not miss it either. Slowly the spotlight tilted. The youngest got the solo, the big finish, the moment the room was waiting for, and the older 2 became, in effect, the opening for their baby sister. And then, as the years went on, and they grew into young women who wanted lives of their own, they began to slip away from the act altogether. They married. They stepped back. One by one, the sisters left the road, and the road narrowed down to a single child and her mother, and the whole weight of the family's ambition came to rest on the smallest set of shoulders in the house. Picture that world she was carried through. Theaters, some of them respectable, and clubs, some of them not. The kind of late-night rooms where the audiences were rough, and the bookings were shady, and now and then the police came through the door. A little girl in a spotlight in a smoky room full of grown men, singing, while her mother worked the manager for the fee, and the piano and the terms. Ethel handled all of it, the money and the men and the schedule and the moods, and she was good at it, hard and quick and impossible to push around. And the child watched her mother move through that grown-up world of deals and drink and danger as the one fixed point in it, the one who knew the way. It bound them together, the 2 of them against the road, and it also taught the girl exactly the wrong lesson about what love looked like, which was that love looked like being managed, being handled, being kept and used and steered by the person who claimed you. She would look for that shape of love for the rest of her life, and she would find it over and over, because it was the only shape she knew. And it was lonely in a way that a child could not have named. The sisters gone, the father fading into the background, the mother more a manager than a mother, just a girl in the act and the endless next town, wanted on the stage and set aside off it, a little professional in a child's body who had never once been allowed to simply be a child among children. That was the life. That was normal as far as she knew. She had nothing to compare it to, and a small girl's body has limits. It gets tired. It gets sick. It wants sometimes to just be a child and not a paycheck. Ethel had an answer for that, and the answer is the thing that turns the stomach. By the time Judy was around 9 or 10 years old, according to the biographers who later pieced this together, her mother was giving her pills, uppers to keep her going through the long days and the long drives, and the endless shows, the pep pills, the stimulants that would make a tired child feel bright and awake and ready. And then at night, when the child was wired and could not come down, downers to knock her out, sleeping pills to force the rest that the uppers had stolen, up in the morning with one, down at night with the other, so the act could keep moving. Ethel's own explanation, in the version that has come down to us, was as plain and as chilling as a woman talking about a car that needed gas. I have to keep these girls going. Now honesty matters here, and this audience knows the difference between a fact and a legend. So let it be said plainly. The clearest source for this, the early pills, the age, the whole mother started it version, is Judy's biographer Gerald Clark, who put it together decades later out of interviews and family memory and the study of a lifetime. There is not a stack of paperwork from 1932 with a mother's confession on it. What there is a careful reconstruction by the man who knew the story best, echoed by others, and matching in every important way the thing that is beyond doubt, which is what came later. Judy Garland spent her adult life on uppers and downers. She died from them. Somebody taught her body that cycle before she was old enough to know what a cycle was. The people who spent their careers studying her came to believe it was her mother. On the road, with the best of practical intentions and the worst of consequences, and it is very hard, looking at everything that followed, to believe they got it wrong. But the pills are only half of it, and honestly not even the worst half. And here is where we come to the thing Judy said herself, in her own voice, that no biographer had to reconstruct. Years and years later, an old woman before her time, Judy sat down for a television interview with Barbara Walters, and she talked about her mother, and she did not spare her. She said her mother was truly a stage mother, and a mean one, and she said it was jealousy, because her mother had absolutely no talent of her own. And then she told a small story that says more than any list of dates could. She said her mother used to stand in the wings when Judy was a little girl, and if the child did not feel good, if she was sick to her tummy and did not want to go out, her mother would tell her, "You get out and sing, or I'll wrap you around the bedpost and break you off short." So Judy said, "I'd go out and sing." Sit inside that sentence for a moment. A sick little girl in the wings of some theater, dizzy, wanting to lie down, wanting her mother to be a mother, and the mother leaning in close, out of the audience's view, with a threat about breaking her body in half, until the child walks out into the lights and does the one thing that will make the threat go away, which is to be wonderful. And she was wonderful. She was always wonderful. That was the trap. Her being wonderful is what made the whole machine keep running. There is one more line from those years, and it is the quietest and the most devastating, and Judy said it more than once in different rooms across the decades, because it never stopped being true. "The only time I felt wanted," she said, "when I was a kid, was when I was on stage performing." Read it again. Not that the stage was where she felt most alive, or most special, or most herself, though all of that was surely true too. Wanted, the most basic thing a child needs, the plain animal certainty that the people who made you are glad you exist. She could only get it by singing for it. Off the stage she was a problem, a body to be managed, a schedule to be kept, a weight to be watched. On the stage she was adored, so of course she never wanted to leave the stage. The 2-year-old her father had to carry off kicking became the woman who could not stop touring, even when it was killing her. And it is the same little girl the whole way through, still trying to sing her way into being loved. That is the thing the mother did that was worse than you think. Not just the pills, though the pills were monstrous. Not just the threats, though the threats were cruel. The deepest wound was the arrangement underneath all of it. The lesson taught so early and so completely that Judy never once in her life managed to unlearn it. That love is not something you are given. It is something you earn, in front of a crowd, by being good enough. A child raised on that grows into an adult who is never, ever full. No audience is big enough. No amount of applause lasts through the night. You can be the most beloved performer on the planet and lie awake at 3 in the morning certain that the moment you stop being useful, everyone leaves. Ethel did not just push her daughter too hard. Ethel built the emptiness at the center of her and then handed her the pills to fill it. And the pills never worked, and neither did the crowds. And that was the design, even if Ethel never once saw it as a design. Through all of this, there was still one person in that house who stood on the child's side. And the story of what her mother did to her cannot be told without the story of the one who was quietly protecting her from it. Because the day he died is the day the last door closed. Frank Gum was not a strong man, in the way the word strong is usually meant. He could not stop his wife. He could not stop the road. He could not fix the thing in himself that kept the family moving and kept the marriage cracking, the separations and the reconciliations, the leaving and the coming back, the fear his youngest daughter felt every time the parents pulled apart, never sure if this was the time it stayed broken. He was not a rescuer, but he was warm and he was on her side. And in a childhood, run by a woman who measured love in ticket sales, a warm father who was simply glad you existed, was worth more than gold. Judy remembered him as the one who was for her, the soft one, the parent whose love did not come with a stage attached. He had his own sorrows and his own secrets, and he could not shield her from her mother's ambition, not really, but he could be a place to stand. He sang the old songs around the house. He kept ties to the church choirs. He laughed easily, that spacious summer smile, and when he was in the room the machine ran a little cooler. As long as Frank was alive, Judy was never entirely alone with what her mother and the world wanted to do to her. By 1935, the girl's act had carried them to the doorstep of the thing Ethel had wanted her whole life. Word of the youngest Garland sisters' voice had reached Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the grandest studio in Hollywood, the one that boasted more stars than there were in heaven. Louis B. Mayer, the man who ran it, sent a songwriter down to a theater in downtown Los Angeles to have a look, and the report came back good. And so, one September day in 1935, 13-year-old Judy Garland was brought onto the MGM lot in Culver City for an audition, and the person who brought her was her father. She stood in a room full of the most powerful men in the picture business, and she opened her mouth, and out came a song called Zing, Went the Strings of My Heart. It is a small, sweet, aching thing about a heart leaping to life at the sight of someone, and it happened to be a song out of her father's old vaudeville days, a song from Frank's own repertoire, the kind of number he might have sung himself in a Minnesota theater a decade before. She sang her father's song in a room of strangers, and the strangers went still, and they signed her almost on the spot. No real test, barely a formality, a minor's contract that a court would have to approve, countersigned by Mayer himself before the month was out. It was the beginning of everything. It was what the whole family had been driving toward for 9 hard years. Hold onto the picture of that day for a second, because of what came right after it. It was her father who brought her onto that lot. Not her mother for once, but Frank, driving his youngest daughter through the gates of the studio that was about to swallow her whole, sitting somewhere out of frame, while she sang his song to the men who would own her. Of all the days a father and daughter get, that was one of their last good ones. The two of them together at the doorway of everything. Before anyone knew the doorway would cost her so much. She sang the song he had once sung, and it opened the door and he was there to see it. A few weeks was all they had left, and then, weeks later, it fell in. In the middle of November 1935, Judy was getting ready to sing on a national radio broadcast, the Shell Chateau Hour, one of the first real showcases of her brand new studio life. Word came that her father had been taken to the hospital. He had spinal meningitis, a savage, fast illness in those years before the drugs that would later beat it, and he was sinking quickly. It is said that Frank, in his hospital bed, asked to hear his daughter sing on the radio that night, and that he listened to her voice come across the wire, the voice he had first heard filling his own little theater between the pictures. By the next morning, the 17th of November, 1935, he was gone. He was 49 years old. She was 13. She had just signed the contract that would make her immortal, and within weeks, the one person who had ever stood on her side was dead, and she understood exactly what it meant. She said it plainly later. I thought, now no one is on my side. That was the whole of it. The buffer was gone. The soft place was gone. The one adult in her life, whose love did not require a performance, was in the ground at Forest Lawn, and the 13-year-old girl was left alone in the machine, with her mother on one side and the largest, most powerful studio on earth on the other, and both of them wanting exactly the same thing from her, and neither of them, ever again, going to let her rest. Here is a hard truth about what her mother did, and it is one people miss because they want a single villain, and life almost never gives you one. Ethel did not fight the studio. Ethel joined it. When Judy signed with MGM, a normal mother, a protective one, might have seen the machine for what it was and thrown her body across the gears. Ethel did the opposite. She got herself onto the studio payroll. It was a common arrangement in those years. a way around the thin protections that were supposed to guard a child performer's earnings and welfare. The mother would be paid a fee, a stipend drawn out of the child's own salary, in exchange for keeping the child in line, making sure she showed up, made her weight, hit her marks, did what the studio needed done, which means that at the exact moment, her daughter needed someone to stand between her and Louis B. Mayer. Ethel signed a deal that made her interests and Mayer's interests the same. She was no longer only the stage mother in the wings. She was, in a real and paid sense, the studio's woman inside the family. The two forces that would spend the next decade breaking this child down were not opposing each other. They were working together, and one of them was her mother, and Mayer's MGM went to work on her. It is a grim thing to describe, but the audience deserves the specifics, because the specifics are where the cruelty lives. At 13, Judy was an awkward age for the studio, older than the darling child stars, not yet the glamorous woman they could sell as a leading lady. She stood 4 feet 11.5 inches. She had a plain, sweet, round girl-next-door face in a studio full of the most sculpted beauties in the world. Girls like Lana Turner and Ava Gardner, and a little later, Elizabeth Taylor, all of them in the same studio school on the same lot. All of them a daily mirror telling Judy she did not measure up. One of the directors who worked with her put it flatly. She was the big money maker, and the studio treated her like the ugly duckling, and it wounded her for years. Mayer, who liked to present himself as a father to his young stars, a kindly patriarch of the great MGM family, called this particular daughter his little hunchback, mocking a slight curve in her spine. Other accounts have him calling her a fat little pig with pigtails. She was a growing girl who had lost the only parent who loved her without conditions, and the most powerful man in her professional life had a pet name for her that was an insult about her body. The studio put caps on her teeth and slid rubber discs into her nose to reshape it for the camera. They dressed her plainly, kept her looking younger than she was, and they watched what she ate the way a warden watches a cell. The diet was its own quiet torture. The MGM commissary was instructed to ignore whatever Judy ordered, and to serve her a bowl of chicken soup and a cup of black coffee, and that was the meal. Cigarettes were pressed on her to kill her appetite. There are stories of the studio putting eyes on her, even at home, to make sure she was not eating. Spies to guard a teenager against the crime of being hungry. She was a young woman told, every single day in 100 ways, that her natural body was a mistake that had to be corrected. And she believed it, and she never stopped believing it, not when she was underweight, not when the whole world was in love with her, not ever. From the time I was 13, she said later, there was a constant struggle between MGM and me over whether or not to eat, how much to eat, what to eat. 13, the age her father died, the age the studio took over. She did her growing up on that lot, in the studio school where MGM was legally required to educate its child stars between shots. And it was there, in the classroom and on the sound stages, that the wound about her own face and body got set for good, because she was not learning her lessons alone. She was in the same rooms day after day with the most beautiful young women the studio had under contract, the future glamour queens, the faces that would sell 1 million magazine covers. And beside them she was the short one, the plain one, the girl with the wholesome round face and the little body they kept trying to fix with caps and rubber and corsets. She was the one making the money, the biggest earner on the lot in time, and she was treated as the one who did not belong at the beauty table. You can survive being called plain by a stranger. It is a different thing to spend your teenage years being told it, gently and not so gently, by the most powerful people in your life, every single day, while sitting next to the proof of what you were not. Her closest ally in all of it was another child of the machine, Mickey Rooney, who was being run just as hard on the other side of the same system. And the two of them were paired up in picture after picture. The bright, bouncy, wholesome young Americans of the backyard musicals, kids putting on a show, all pep and innocence and let's do it right here energy. It was wonderful to watch, and it was manufactured out of exhaustion. The pep on the screen and the pep pills off it were not unrelated. Audiences bought tickets to see two happy, tireless teenagers bursting with life. And the reason those teenagers could seem so tireless, day after day, on schedules that would have flattened a grown adult, was that the studio was keeping them upright by chemistry and knocking them down the same way. The joy was real, in its moments, because Judy could not help being alive and funny and quick. But it was joy squeezed out of a body that was being pushed far past what a body can do. And the squeezing had a cost that would come due later, with interest, for the rest of her life. And then there were the pills again. Except now they were not a mother's kitchen table solution to a long drive. Now they were institutional. Now there was a studio hospital and studio doctors, and a whole system built to keep its young workers producing around the clock. The pattern her mother had started on the Vaudeville Road, MGM took and made enormous. Judy and her friend Mickey Rooney, another child of the machine, were fed stimulants to keep them on their feet through shooting days that ran impossibly long. And then, when the day finally ended, they were taken to the studio hospital and given sleeping pills to knock them out. And then, after only a few hours, they were shaken awake and dosed again so the work could start over. Judy described it herself, and there is no softening it. They'd give us pep pills to keep us on our feet long after we were exhausted, she said. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us out with sleeping pills. After 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us the pep pills again. She said they worked stretches of 72 hours that way, days and nights running together, held upright by chemistry, put down by chemistry, a rhythm with no rest in it at all. And here is the terrible symmetry of it, the thing that makes her mother's early choice ring across the years like a struck bell. The studio did not have to teach her body the cycle. Her mother had already done that. All MGM did was turn the volume up. This is the part of the answer to the title that takes a while to fully land, so let it land slowly. When people ask what Ethel did, the honest reply is that she did two things that fit together like a lock and a key. She taught a small child that love had to be earned by performing, and she taught that same child's body to run on uppers and downers to keep performing. And then she handed both of those things to the most efficient star-making, body-breaking machine in the history of entertainment, and got on its payroll and let it finish the work. She did not build the machine, but she loaded her daughter into it, and she oiled the parts, and she looked away from the harm because the harm and the success were the same thing, and she had wanted the success her whole life. You can feel the temptation, watching all this, to make her a cartoon. The research resists it, and so should we, because the truth is more interesting and more sad. Ethel was not a woman cackling over a cauldron. She was a plain, driven, disappointed person who had spent her whole life certain she deserved a bigger stage than she was ever going to get, and who found in her youngest daughter the talent she had always wanted and never had. She lived through Judy. She could not help it, and the era did not exactly stand against her. This was the age of the stage mother, a whole American type, ambitious women all over vaudeville and Hollywood pushing their children onto stages, managing their money, controlling their diets, trading childhood for a shot at the big time, because the system rewarded exactly that and offered ambitious families almost nothing else. Ethel was an extreme case, but she was a case of a common disease, not a freak of nature. That is not an excuse. It is something harder than an excuse. It is a reason, and reasons are what make a person human, and Ethel was human, which is precisely what makes what she did to her daughter so hard to look at. The strange thing is that it worked. That is what nobody wants to say, and everybody has to. The pushing, the pills, the terrible diet, the mother and the studio grinding in the same direction. It produced a talent so large that it is still lighting up screens more than half a century after the woman herself died. All the damage was building the same thing at the same time, and in 1938 the machine, the mother, the studio, and the wounded, gifted girl at the center of it all arrived at the thing that would make her name last forever. She was 16 years old when they began filming The Wizard of Oz in the autumn of 1938, and she turned 17 during the long shoot, and the picture they were making was, of all the stories in the world, the one about a girl who only wants to go home. There is a cruelty in that so perfect it almost looks arranged. They cast a child who had never been allowed to be a child, who had lost her father and her hometown, and any ordinary version of a family, to play the most homesick girl in American movies. She spent months on a soundstage aching, on camera, for a place of comfort and safety and belonging. And then the cameras stopped, and she went back to a life that had none of those things in it anywhere. The making of it was brutal in the plain physical sense. The days started before dawn, hair and makeup at 4 in the morning, 6 days a week, long hours under lights hot enough to cook a person. The production dragging on for months and chewing through directors, hazards everywhere in the effects work of that era. And through all of it, MGM was still worried, above all, about how the girl looked. They needed Dorothy to read as a young child, and Judy at 16 was becoming a young woman. So they took her developing body and they hid it. They bound her chest flat. They laced her into a corset to erase her shape. The famous blue gingham dress was chosen in part because its cut and its checks helped blur the figure of the girl inside it. The image the whole world would fall in love with, wholesome Dorothy in her pinafore, was built by physically strapping down a teenager's body so that a 16-year-old would look like a little girl. And the pills were simply part of the day now, as ordinary as the makeup chair. By the time the shoot wrapped, the pattern that her mother had started on the road and the studio had scaled into a system was fully set into her. Uppers to work, downers to sleep, a way of living inside her own body that would never fully leave. She was 17 years old and already, in every meaningful sense, dependent. The most beloved children's film ever made was, for its star, a job that finished the process of hollowing her out. There is a detail about that song that almost nobody knows, and once you know it, it changes the whole picture. The studio nearly threw it away. After the film was shot and assembled, the men in the front office looked at the early cut and decided the song had to go. It slowed the picture down, they said. It was beneath the production to have their leading girl standing in a drab farmyard, leaning against a hay wagon, singing a slow ballad, when the whole point was color and spectacle and flying monkeys, and a road made of gold. A song like that, sung by a plain girl in a barnyard, was not what people paid to see. So the order came down to cut it. And for a little while the single most beloved 3 minutes Judy Garland would ever record, the song that would become her name, her signature, the thing sung at her funeral and hummed at a million bedsides ever since, was slated to be dropped on the floor and swept out with the rest of the trims. It took people inside the production fighting for it, arguing and pushing back and refusing to let it go, before the front office finally, grudgingly, allowed the song to stay in the picture. It stayed. It went on to win the Academy Award. It became, in time, one of the most famous songs in the history of the world. Sit with what that almost was for a moment, because it tells you exactly how the machine that ran her saw her. To the men at the top, the ache in that song was not a treasure. It was a drag on the pacing, the very quality that made it immortal, the plain, unguarded longing of a young girl who meant every word, was the quality they wanted to cut, because it did not fit the product. They could not hear what was in it. They heard a slow spot in a musical. It took someone who actually understood her to save it, and it very nearly did not get saved. And if a couple of arguments had gone the other way in a screening room in 1939, the world would never have had the one thing Judy Garland made that outlived every wound that was done to her. That is the studio she was raised into. That is the taste and the judgment of the people who owned her. They almost erased the best of her by accident, filing it under too slow. And then when it succeeded, they took the credit, and she got the ache and they got the picture. Then she stood on that soundstage, a strapped-down, underfed, chemically managed teenager, and she sang a song about a place somewhere over the rainbow where the dreams you dare to dream really do come true. And something in the ache of it was so real that it went straight through the screen and into the chest of everyone who ever heard it. Because it was real, she was not acting the longing. She had the longing, the wish in that song for somewhere better, somewhere safe, somewhere over and beyond and away from all this, was the truest thing about her. And she poured it into 3 minutes of film, and it made her one of the most famous people alive. The wound and the gift were the same wound and the same gift. They always had been. And now go back to where we started, to the Green Witch and the little girl who said the real one was in the wings. because here is the thing that Judy Garland understood, standing at the very center of the most famous fairy tale in the movies. In the film, the Wicked Witch of the West wants Dorothy's power, the ruby slippers, the thing that makes her special, and she will chase the girl to the ends of Oz to take it, and she is beaten in the end, and Dorothy goes home safe. That is the story on the screen. Off the screen, the woman who wanted the girl's power, who had chased that power her whole life, and finally found it inside her own smallest child, who could not be beaten and did not melt and would not let the girl go home, was Ethel. Judy played Dorothy, running from a witch that a nation of children learned to fear. She went home every night to the one the movie could not show you. She knew exactly what she meant when she named her mother the real Wicked Witch of the West. She had lived inside both witches at once. While the world was falling in love with Dorothy, the family was living on her. That is a plain fact of the arithmetic. Frank had been the earner, and Frank was dead. And after 1935, the household in California ran on the money coming out of Judy's MGM contract. The child was the breadwinner. The child had been the breadwinner in a sense since she was small, but now it was formal. Now it was a studio salary, and now her mother held the checkbook. You already know Ethel was on the payroll as the manager and the chaperone, drawing her fee out of Judy's earnings. What is less known and cuts in a different way is what happened to the rest of the money, because a driven ambition and a good head for money are two different things, and Ethel had only the first. Judy put it with the dry, wounded wit she used for the worst things. My mother, she said, had a marvelous talent for mishandling money. Mine. The stories that survive are almost unbelievable in their smallness and their waste. Once the MGM money was steady, the family was living in a little 4-unit apartment building, and Judy, a teenager with more financial sense than the adults around her, suggested that they buy the building itself, live in 1 unit and rent out the other 3. A solid, sensible investment in the one thing that always holds value, which is a roof. Ethel said no. By one account, she struck her daughter for suggesting it, and instead of the apartment building, Ethel put money into a nickel mine, out in the desert near Needles, a hole in the ground that was going to make them all rich. It made them nothing. We never got a nickel back, Judy said, and you can hear across the decades that she never quite got over the sheer, stupid waste of it. The sensible idea slapped down, and the fantasy chased into the sand. That is the part of the answer to the title that is almost funny. If it were happening to anyone else, the mother who had built her daughter into a machine for making money could not, in the end, hold on to the money the machine produced. But it points at something underneath the comedy, and the something is this. Ethel's control was never really about Judy's good. It was about Ethel's needs, Ethel's ambition, Ethel's grip. The apartment building would have been for Judy. The nickel mine was Ethel's dream, Ethel's gamble, Ethel's story about herself as a woman who was going to strike it big at last. Even the money her child bled to earn, the mother spent as if it were the raw material of her own delayed success. And the control reached into places money does not touch. When Judy was about 19, in her first marriage, she became pregnant, and the studio, terrified for the wholesome image it had built and still needed, wanted the pregnancy ended. And by the accounts that have come down, the mother went along with the studio rather than standing with her daughter. Whatever the private truth of a thing that private, the pattern is the same pattern we have seen from the beginning. The girl's own body, the girl's own life, decided by other people for other reasons. The mother once again on the side of the machine, from the wings of a theater to the studio commissary, to the most intimate corner of a young woman's life. The message never changed. Your body is not yours, it belongs to the act. It could not hold. A grip that tight held for that long on a person that gifted was always going to be shaken off in the end. And as Judy moved into her late teens and 20s and grew from the studio's ugly duckling into one of the biggest stars in the world, she began, slowly and painfully, to pull away from her mother. The distance did not come all at once. It came the way these things come, in arguments and silences, and cutoffs and small returns, in a daughter trying to build a life of her own, and a mother who did not know how to be anything but the manager of that life. Ethel remarried to a man named Will Gilmore and became Ethel Gilmore, and Judy hated it. She hated the man, and she hated the timing, and she hated one suspects, the whole idea of her mother reaching for her own happiness after spending Judy's childhood insisting that happiness was a thing you earned by working. The estrangement deepened. There were periods of no contact at all. The financial support that Judy had been sending began to thin, and Ethel, the woman who had once managed a rising star and stood at the center of the MGM machine, found herself pushed to the edges of the life she had built her daughter to have. And here the story does something you would not expect, and it is the thing that keeps Ethel from ever quite becoming the cartoon. The woman who had lived her whole life reaching for the stage ended up, at the end, as far from it as a person can get. By the early 1950s, Ethel Gilmore was working as a clerk at the Douglas aircraft plant in Santa Monica, a factory job, ordinary hours, ordinary pay, punching in and out like anyone else. The mother of one of the most famous women alive was checking parts on an assembly line, largely cut off from the daughter, whose voice was on records in half the homes in America. There is no triumph in that for anyone, whatever you think Ethel deserved, and reasonable people can hold very hard opinions about it. There is no victory in a lonely woman aging into an ordinary job, while the child she both made and damaged refuses to take her calls. On the 5th of January, 1953, Ethel drove to work at the aircraft plant as she always did, and she got out of her car, and somewhere between the car and the door, her heart gave out. They found her in the company parking lot. A heart attack, 59 years old, alone on the asphalt in the winter morning between her car and her job. She was buried at Forest Lawn, the same ground where Frank had gone 18 years before, the man she had married for love or ambition, or the promise of a life inside the light, back when she was a plain, driven girl in Superior, who was sure the world owed her a bigger stage than it was ever going to give her. Judy came to the funeral. She was married to Sid Luft by then, and he came with her, but she had already largely closed the door on her mother years before, and the funeral did not open it again. There is no scene in the record where the daughter forgives the mother, no deathbed reconciliation, no letter found later that makes it all right. Ethel died estranged from Judy, and Judy went on living without ever, in any moment anyone recorded, letting her mother off the hook. There is something almost unbearable in the timing of that death, too. Ethel went out to work one ordinary morning and never came home, dropped in a parking lot with no one beside her, and the daughter who might once have been the person to grieve her hardest was, by then, barely speaking to her. Two people who had been bound together as tightly as a mother and child can be bound, the maker and the maid, ended their story not with a reckoning or a reconciliation, but with a phone that had stopped ringing, and a body on the cold ground between a car and a factory door. Whatever had been between them was simply left unfinished, the way most of the hardest things between people are. To understand why she could not forgive, you have to follow what the childhood did to the rest of the life, because the mother did not stop shaping the daughter when the daughter grew up and moved out. That is the last and worst thing about what Ethel did. It did not end. She built the pattern so deep and so early that it kept running long after she herself was gone, running in Judy's marriages and Judy's parenting and Judy's body, running right up to the last night of her life. The mother died in 1953, and the daughter kept living out the mother's lessons for another 16 years, and then those lessons killed her. Start with the marriages, because there were 5 of them, and they tell the story cleanly. David Rose, then Vincent Minnelli, then Sid Luft, then Mark Harron, then Mickey Deans. 5 men, 5 attempts at the thing she had never been given, which was steady love that did not depend on her being wonderful, and each time the pattern repeated, because it was the only pattern she knew. She would fall hard and fast, sure this was the safe place at last, and then the old certainty would surface, the certainty her mother had installed. That love is conditional, and people leave, and the only way to hold anyone is to keep earning them. She would grow needy, and then she would grow frightened, and then it would break, and she would move on to the next one, still looking for the father who was on her side, still trying to fill the hole that no husband could fill because it had been dug before she could walk. Think about who she kept marrying and needing and clinging to. She reached again and again for men who would either help manage her the way her mother had managed her, or men who would help her keep the pills coming, or both. The dynamic she had learned as a child, Love wrapped up with control, love wrapped up with a substance, became the only shape love could take. She did not choose it consciously. Nobody does. She was simply doing the thing the deepest part of her had been taught, which was that being cared for and being controlled were the same act, and that the price of closeness was surrendering yourself. And the money ran the same way it always had, which is to say it ran through her hands and into everyone else's. This is the part of the pattern that almost nobody connects back to Ethel, but the line is straight. Judy had been raised as the family's engine, the one whose voice paid the bills, the child breadwinner who learned before she was 10 that her job was to earn and other people's job was to spend it. That lesson did not wear off when she grew up. It became the shape of her whole adult financial life. She stayed everyone's meal ticket. She felt a bone-deep duty to provide, to carry the people around her, to pay for the lives of the family and the friends and the hangers-on, because that was the only version of being needed she had ever been taught. And being needed was the closest thing to being loved she trusted. So the same thing that had happened with the nickel mine happened again and again, at a bigger and bigger scale, for the rest of her life. She earned fortunes, real fortunes, the kind of money a coal town would not see in a generation, and it vanished into bad management and worse advice, into the pockets of the men who handled her affairs, into taxes she did not understand and debts she did not track, and deals that were good for everyone but her. Husbands managed her money and lost it. Managers took their cut and left her exposed. By the end of her life, one of the most bankable stars the movies ever produced was in serious, grinding debt, hounded for money, taking bookings she was too sick to play because she could not afford to stop. The woman who filled the greatest concert halls in the world could not keep the lights on, and it was not all taken from her either, which is the part that makes it hers, not just theirs. She gave a great deal of it away, freely, to people who were down on their luck, to friends who needed a doctor's bill paid or a rent covered, to near strangers with a hard story, because a woman who had learned that money was the thing you produced for others could also, at her best, turn that lesson into open-handed kindness. She was generous the way only someone who does not respect money can be generous, and it left her broke the same way, and the two things were the same thing wearing different clothes. And the root of it, underneath all the specific bad decisions, was the thing her mother had planted at the start, the training that told her she existed to generate money for other people to spend, that her worth was measured in what she could produce and hand over, that stopping was not allowed. Ethel had taught her to be used. The world was happy to keep teaching the same lesson right to the end. And then there was the work, which was the other thing her mother had taught her, that the stage was the one place she was truly wanted, and so she could never leave it, no matter what it cost. Her adult career was a jagged line of soaring highs and crashing lows, and the pattern under it never changed. She left MGM at the end of the 1940s, or was let go. The years of pills and strain and missed days, finally too much even for the studio that had made all of it, and she was for a while considered finished, a cautionary tale at 28, and then she would come roaring back, because the talent was real and the need was bottomless, and there was no comeback in the history of show business, quite like a Judy Garland comeback. She went back to the concert stage, a woman alone in a spotlight, with an orchestra behind her and thousands of people in the dark in front of her, and she gave them everything, and they gave it back, wave after wave of a love so loud it could shake a hall. She came back to the movies too, once in the middle of the 1950s, in a picture about a star being born. It was the story of a young woman climbing up into fame, while the man who loves her, an older star, drinks and slides and burns himself down, and there is no way to watch it now without feeling the floor tilt, because the picture was telling the truth about her own life while she stood inside it. She knew that kind of falling from both sides. She had watched her father soften and lose ground. She had watched her own gift lift her up over everyone, and she poured all of it into the part. And what came out was not really a performance at all. It was closer to a confession set to music. The whole town watched it and understood that they were seeing something rare, an actress using her own open wounds as the material, and everyone agreed she would win the highest prize the movies give. The night the prize was handed out, she was not in the room. She had just had a baby, her son, and she was in a hospital bed, and she was the clear favorite. And so a television crew came and set itself up right there in the hospital room. Cameras and lights and cables run across the floor, ready to carry her acceptance out live to the whole country the instant her name was called. Think about that picture for a second, because it is the story of her whole life, folded into one hotel bright room. The machine had come one more time to point its lights at her and wait for her to be wonderful. She lay there weak and hopeful, the cameras aimed at her face, the crew standing by, everyone poised to love her the moment she won. And then the envelope was opened far away in that other room, and it held a different name, and she lost. And the crew, the accounts say, simply packed up their cameras and their lights and their cables and walked out of the hospital room without a word, because there was no longer any reason to point a camera at her. The love had a condition, and she had not met it, and so the love got up and left, right in front of her, exactly the way it always had. One wit sent word that it was the biggest robbery since Brinks, and it was a kind thing to say, but it missed the deeper cruelty. The robbery she would have recognized was not the prize. It was the lights going dark, and the room emptying out the instant she stopped being a winner. She had been living that exact moment since she was a little girl in a hotel room in a lumber town. And here it was again, dressed up in Hollywood clothes, teaching her the same lesson one more time. You are wanted when you win. When you do not win, watch how fast the room clears. The greatest of those concert nights, in a famous hall in New York where she stood before a sold-out crowd and simply undid them song by song, has been called the greatest single night in the history of show business. On a night like that, the room did not just applaud her. It came apart. People stood on their seats. Grown, famous, dignified people, stars in their own right, wept openly in the good seats and pressed toward the stage as if they could not bear the distance, reaching up toward her, needing to be nearer to whatever it was that was pouring off her. She stood in the middle of all that noise, small in the light, a lifetime of training and damage and hunger and gift, standing in a single body, and she gave it back to them, note after note, holding nothing in reserve, because holding something in reserve was a thing she had never in her life learned how to do. She was, on those nights, at the very top of the mountain, more loved in a single room than most people are loved in a lifetime. And it was never enough, and it could never be enough, because you cannot fill with strangers a hole that a mother dug. That is the terrible engine at the center of her whole adult life, and it runs straight back to a woman standing in the wings of a theater, telling a sick little girl to get out there and sing. Judy would walk off stage from one of those thunderous ovations, a room full of people on their feet weeping and roaring her name, and within hours the certainty would come back, cold as ever, that none of it was real, that the moment she stopped being wonderful, they would all be gone. So she would reach for the pills to get through the night, and reach for them again to get up the next day. The same uppers and downers her mother had first put in her hand around the age of 10, and the whole cycle would turn again. Applause and terror and chemistry and applause. The breakdowns came, more and more of them, the exhaustion and the collapses, and the hospital stays. She was subjected, at one dark point, to electroconvulsive therapy, the treatment of the time for a mind that would not stop grinding itself down. There were suicide attempts. There was, always, the drinking that came in later to sit alongside the pills. Her third husband, Sid Luft, who loved her and fought with her and tried and failed to hold her together, wrote it as plainly as anyone ever has. For most of her teenage and adult life, he said, she had been on either Benzedrine or a diet or both. Turn that sentence over. Her whole life, teenage and adult, a pill or a starvation or both at once. And it started, he is telling you, in the teenage years, which is to say it started with her mother and the studio, and it never once let go. Here is the part that ought to break your heart clean in two, before we even get to what her children lived through. She saw it coming. She was not blind to what had been done to her, and she was not blind to the danger that she might do it again. She swore she would not be her mother. She said it more than once, in one form or another, that whatever else happened, she would not become Ethel, would not do to her own children the thing that had been done to her, would not turn her babies into an act and a bank account, and a reason to keep the lights on. She wanted badly to give them the ordinary childhood she had never had, the one with a floor under it, the one where you were loved for being alive and not for being a draw. She knew exactly what the wound was, because she was living inside it, and she meant with everything in her to spare them. And she could not. That is the cruelty of the thing her mother built. It did not run on intention. Judy could see the trap in perfect detail, could name it, could hate it, could vow against it in the clear light of a good morning. And none of that was enough, because the machine her mother had installed in her did not answer to her wishes. The pills did not care that she loved her children. The collapses did not schedule themselves around their school days. The nights she could not get out of bed, the tour she had to take because the money was gone again, the hospitals, the moods that swung from ecstatic to bottomless in the space of an afternoon. All of it went on happening to her, and therefore to them, no matter how fiercely she wished otherwise. You can promise a child a floor. You cannot give them one out of a self that never had one. She fought her mother's inheritance harder than anyone will ever know, and the inheritance won anyway, not because she was weak, but because it had gotten to her first, before she had any say. And by the time she had a say, it was already who she was. And so she carried it into the next generation, which is the saddest chapter of all, because the wounded child grew up to be a mother herself 3 times over, and she loved her children fiercely, and she could not always take care of them, because she had never been taken care of, and did not have a working model of what it looked like. Her oldest, Lisa, has described a childhood that was madcap and thrilling, and also underneath, a slow reversal of the natural order. A child who became the caretaker, counting her mother's pills, managing the crises, playing nurse and doctor and steadying hand to the adult who was supposed to be steadying her. The very role reversal Judy had lived under Ethel. Love tangled up with responsibility and control, and the constant management of a difficult grown-up reappeared in the next house, in the next childhood, aimed the other way now, because that was the only shape of family Judy had ever been given to pass down. There is a moment from that 1967 television interview, the one where she called her mother mean and jealous and talentless. That tells you more about the whole relationship than any biography could, because it shows you that even 14 years after Ethel's death, Judy could not get free of her, not even in a room, not even in front of a camera, not even to condemn her cleanly. She was sitting there with 2 of her own children beside her, running down the list of her mother's cruelties. And at one point she stopped, and she reached up and touched her earring, and she explained, half joking, that her mother had just knocked it from wherever she was now, the way she always did whenever Judy said something critical about her. And then Judy spoke out loud to the empty air, to the dead woman, in the voice you would use to scold a child. "Now, mother," she said, "you behave yourself." And then she called her wicked, and laughed and moved on. Sit with how strange that is. It is a joke, and it is not a joke at all. She is telling a national television audience that her mother was a monster, and in the same breath, she is treating her mother as a lingering presence in the room, a ghost with opinions, a woman still capable of reaching across death to tug at her daughter's ear. When the daughter speaks out of turn, she has not exorcised her. She cannot. The mother is still standing in the wings, 14 years dead, still watching, still ready to correct her. That is what a childhood like Judy's does. It does not leave you with a villain you can hate at a clean distance. It leaves you with a presence that is inside you forever, half tormentor and half the only mother you ever had. And you cannot fully hate her, because to hate her completely would be to hate the thing that made you. And you cannot love her either, and so you are stuck, telling jokes at her funeral that go on for the rest of your life. The rest of Judy's life was not long. She had at the very end one more marriage, to a much younger man named Mickey Deans, and she was performing almost to the end because she had to, financially and otherwise, worn down and often unwell, the voice frayed, but the need to be in front of a crowd as fierce as it had been, when she was 2 years old, refusing to leave the stage. In June of 1969, in a rented house in London, at the age of 47, she was found dead in the bathroom. The cause was an accidental overdose of barbiturates, sleeping pills, the very same class of drug that, the biographers believe, her mother had first given her around the age of 10 to bring her down at night after the pep pills had kept her up, so the act could keep moving. She had been taking some version of that pill off and on for 37 years. In the end, it stopped her heart while she slept. She was 2 weeks past her 47th birthday when the news went out The grief was enormous and public. Tens of thousands of people, ordinary people who had loved her across the decades, lined up for blocks and stood for hours to pass by and say goodbye. More mourners than the woman herself had ever quite believed were out there. She spent her whole life afraid she was not truly wanted. The line stretching around the block was the answer, and it came a few days too late for her to see it. Think about the shape of that. A girl is taught before she is old enough to know better that a pill is how you get your tired body through another performance and another night. The habit is set by her mother and scaled by her studio and carried by the woman across 4 decades of triumph and collapse. And at the finish, in a strange house in a foreign city, it is a pill that closes the story. The same kind of pill, doing the same job, putting her body down for the night. Except this time, it does not wake her up. The thing that had been introduced to keep the show going finally ended it. You could not write it. It is too neat and too cruel. But it is what happened. And the line from the wings of a Minnesota theater to a bathroom floor in London is straighter than anyone would like it to be. The people best placed to tell you what all of this cost were the ones who lived downstream of it. The 3 children who grew up inside the wreckage that Ethel's hands had first set in motion 2 generations back. They do not all tell it the same way, and the differences between them are part of the truth, because a wound this big does not leave the same shape on every person it touches. Lorna Luft, Judy's daughter with Sid, has been the most direct of the 3 about the grandmother she barely knew. She called Ethel the ultimate stage mother, the woman who pushed Judy onto a stage at the age of 3, and she did not dress it up. "I heard she was dreadful," Lorna said, plainly. "The way you repeat a thing your whole family has always known." Lorna went and wrote it all down. The Gum family and its music and its ambition and its damage, in a memoir that later became a television film that a lot of people saw. And she has spent much of her life trying to hold 2 things at once: the enormous talent and the enormous harm. The mother who was funny and sweet, and the mother who was, in Lorna's own hard word, damaged. She said something once that is about as clear-eyed as anyone in that family has ever managed. "There wasn't enough love in the world," she said, "enough attention in the world to save my mother. Only Judy herself could have done that, and Judy could not, because the thing that needed saving had been broken too early and too deep, back before any of her children were born, back in the wings with Ethel." Think about what Lorna is really saying there. Not that Judy was unloved as an adult. She was loved by millions, loved by her children, loved by husbands and friends and whole halls full of weeping strangers. Lorna is saying that none of it could reach the place that was hurt, because that place had been sealed off in childhood, and no amount of adult love, however true, could get in to fix a thing that was broken before the person could even speak. That is the most precise description anyone has given of what Ethel did. She did not just hurt her daughter. She hurt her in a place that later love could never reach. Liza Minnelli, the oldest, has always guarded her mother's memory more fiercely, and she tells it differently. And she is not wrong either. For a long time, Liza pushed back hard on the idea that her childhood was a horror, insisting that it was madcap and magical, a whirl of hotels and music and adventure, and that she was happy, truly happy, in the middle of the chaos. And that was true. Both things are always true with Judy. But as the years went on, Liza let more of the other truth show through. She has talked about becoming, as a child and a teenager, her mother's caretaker, the one who managed the pills and the moods, a little girl playing at being a nurse and a doctor, and in her own words, a pharmacologist and a psychiatrist for the adult who was supposed to be raising her. She has described a mother of enormous extremes, a woman who, when she was happy, was not merely happy but ecstatic, and when she was sadder than anyone in the world. And she has laid part of it, gently but clearly, at the feet of what was done to Judy as a child, the way her mother was pushed around so much when she was young, the way it never let her go. And then there is Joey, the youngest, Judy's son, who made a different choice, which was to remember the good and leave the rest alone. He has talked about his mother as a performer and a caring parent with a wonderful sense of humor, a woman who loved people, and when the harder things come up, the time she was not, in his phrase, acting right, he has tended to set them gently to one side, rather than pull them apart in public. There is no wrong way for a child to survive a mother like that. Lorna faced it head-on and named it. Lisa held it close and complicated it. Joey chose the warmth and let the shadows be. All three are true responses to the same impossible inheritance. And the fact that 3 children of the same woman had to find 3 different ways to carry her tells you how heavy the thing was that Ethel first set down. What they agree on, underneath the differences, is the shape of it. That the talent was real and enormous and a gift. That the damage was real and enormous and a theft. And that the two could never be separated, because they came from the same source and were made by the same hands. Lorna has called the studio system. Her mother came up in a double-edged sword. The thing that gave the world her talent and took from Judy her health, her peace, her ordinary life, all in the same motion. That is exactly right. And it is exactly right about Ethel too, who was the first edge of that sword. The one that cut before MGM ever got its hands on the girl. The gift and the wound were forged together. You cannot have the voice on Over the Rainbow without the childhood that put that ache into it. And you cannot have that childhood without the woman in the wings. That is the trap the whole family has been living inside for 100 years. The thing they are most proud of and the thing that destroyed her are the same thing. So now, with the whole life laid out, from the 2-year-old refusing to leave the stage to the 47-year-old dead on a bathroom floor, we can finally ask the question the title asks and answer it all the way down. What did Judy Garland's mother do to her, really? And why is it worse than you think? Because you already thought it was bad. Everybody knows the word stage mother, and everybody can picture the pushy woman living through her child. And if that were all of it, it would be a sad, familiar story and not much more. But peel it back one layer at a time, and it keeps getting worse. And it keeps getting worse in ways that most people never get to. The first layer is the one everyone knows. She pushed too hard. She put a small child to work and drove her without mercy, and cared more about the act than about the girl. Bad enough, but not the worst. The second layer is the pills. And here the story turns from ordinary sad to genuinely dark. This was not a mother who worked her child too many hours. This was a mother who reached for a bottle of stimulants and started giving amphetamines to a girl who was not yet 10 years old, to override the body's own signals, to make a tired child act untired so the shows could go on, and then reached for a second bottle to shut that same little body down at night. She did not do it in a rage. She did it as management. She did it as routine. She explained it, when she explained it at all, as a practical necessity, the way you would explain topping up the oil in a car. I have to keep these girls going. That is a sentence about a machine said about a child. And the specific chemicals she chose, the uppers and the downers, are the exact chemicals that would define and eventually end her daughter's life. She did not just push her. She began, with her own hands, the addiction that would run for 37 years and kill her at 47. Most people know Judy had a pill problem. Fewer know it started in the nursery and started with her mother. But even that is not the worst layer. And this is the part that most tellings never reach, because it is not a single shocking act. It is a slow architecture of the soul. The worst thing Ethel did was teach her daughter what love was. She taught her, before the girl could question it, that love is not a thing you simply have because you exist. It is a wage. You go out under the lights and you are good and the room loves you. And that is what love is and where it comes from and how you get it. And when you are off the stage, when you are just a girl who is tired or sick or sad or ordinary, there is no love there because you have not earned any. The only time I felt wanted, she said, was when I was on stage performing. That is not a complaint about a busy childhood. That is a description of a soul built without a floor. A person raised that way spends their whole life falling, reaching for the next audience the way a drowning person reaches for air. And no audience ever holds them up for long, because the thing they are trying to fill was made empty on purpose, or near enough to on purpose, by the one person who was supposed to fill it first. And there is a layer under even that, because when the studio came, when the machine that would grind the girl down arrived with its diets, and its doctors and its pills, and its cruel little nicknames, her mother did not stand in front of it. Her mother got on its payroll. At the one moment, a child most needs a parent to be a wall between her and the powerful people who want to use her. Ethel became a paid part of the using. She aligned herself, formally, financially, with the studio's needs against her own daughter's welfare. Whatever protection a mother is for, in the deepest and oldest sense of the word, she chose not to be that. She chose the machine. That is the layer that turns a story about a difficult, overbearing woman into something colder, because overbearing love is still love, and this was something else. This was a mother taking a fee to help break her child. And then the last layer, the one that makes the whole thing almost unbearable, which is that none of it stopped when Ethel died. She built the pattern so early and so completely that it became the daughter herself. Judy did not carry her mother's damage the way you carry a bad memory, something separate from you that you can set down. She carried it the way you carry your own bones. It was the shape of how she loved, how she worked, how she parented, how she medicated herself through every triumph and every collapse. Ethel was dead 16 years before Judy, and Judy lived every one of those 16 years inside the machine her mother had built in her, and passed pieces of it down to her own children, and then died of it. The worst thing Ethel did was not any single act. It was that she made herself permanent. She got inside her daughter so early that there was never a version of Judy that existed without her. There was no clean self underneath for later love to rescue, because Ethel had been there first, from before the beginning, from before the girl was even born, back when she was still just a question her parents were not sure they wanted to answer. That is why it is worse than you think. Not because of one monstrous thing, but because of the way many things stacked into an architecture. The pushing, then the pills, then the conditional love, then the alliance with the machine, then the permanence of all of it, each layer worse than the last, each one reaching deeper into the person, until the woman on the stage and the wound in the child were the same object and could never be pulled apart. You came in thinking it was a story about a pushy mother. It is a story about a soul that was built without a floor, and then handed the pills to keep from feeling the fall. And yet, this is the part where a lesser telling would stop, having found its monster and dressed it in green. And it is the part where the truth insists on something more difficult, because the truth about Ethel is that she was not a monster. She was a person, and a fairly ordinary kind of person. And the era she lived in did not just permit what she did, it applauded it. Look at the world she was working in. Ethel was not some lone aberration who invented the idea of squeezing a childhood into a career. She was one of a whole American type, the stage mother of the vaudeville and studio years. And there were a lot of them, and the system was built to reward exactly what they did. Think of Rose Havoc, the mother behind Gypsy Rose Lee and June Havoc, the woman so famous for her ferocious ambition that they made a Broadway musical out of her, the archetype of the mother who drags the whole family across the country, chasing her children's fame, and burns down everything in the way. Think of the mothers who managed the great child stars, styling the curls, coaching from the edge of the set, drawing a studio salary as a hairdresser or a coach, controlling the diet and the schedule and the image. Some of them came out of it looking almost admirable, the ones whose children stayed whole, and whose money was kept safe, and whose homes stayed warm. Some of them ruined their children in ways that took decades to see. All of them were doing versions of the same job, in a business that told ambitious families there was no other way in. That is the context Ethel belongs in, and it matters, because it takes her out of the fairy tale and puts her back in history, where she is harder to hate and harder to dismiss. She was a plain, gifted, driven woman who had been told her whole life that she was not quite talented enough, and not quite pretty enough, and not quite special enough, and who then discovered that she had produced, out of her own body, the special thing she had always wanted to be. Of course, she lived through Judy. Of course, she could not tell the difference between her ambition for her daughter and her ambition for herself, because from the inside they felt like the same feeling. She was doing what the mothers around her did, in a system that paid for it, in a country coming through the hardest years of the Depression, when a talented child could mean the difference between the family eating and the family not eating. She was, in her own mind, almost certainly not a villain at all. She was a mother getting her family through, using the one asset the family had, What made her case the notorious one, the one that curdled into the Wicked Witch story while other stage mothers faded into footnotes, was a few things stacking up. It was the pills, first of all, the medical chemical nature of the harm, which gave Judy's whole tragedy a clear and damning origin point that pure pushiness never could. It was that Judy herself, unlike most children of stage mothers, was so articulate and so famous, and so willing to say it out loud on television, in words that stuck. It was that the harm did not fade but bloomed into addiction and breakdown and an early, preventable death. So the origin story kept looking worse the longer the daughter's life went on. And it was that Judy's talent was so enormous, and her ending so sad that people needed a reason, needed a first cause, needed somebody to blame, and there was Ethel, standing in the wings of the story, exactly as she had stood in the wings of the theaters. The obvious answer to the unbearable question of how this happened. But blame is a strange, unsatisfying tool when you use it on a real person, because real people do not hold still for it. Yes, Ethel started the pills, and the studio scaled them into a system, and the doctors of the day handed out amphetamines like aspirin, and the whole culture of the movie business treated its young workers as machines to be run. Yes, Ethel put career before her child's peace, and she was living in a marriage under strain, with a husband whose secret could destroy them all, in an economy that had flattened millions of families, with 3 daughters to feed, and a talent in the youngest that looked like the only door out. Yes, she made herself part of the machine, and she may well have believed, in the way people believe the things they need to believe, that she was helping, that this was how you protected a child in show business, by keeping her working and thin and useful and safe inside the studio's walls. She was not sitting up at night plotting to destroy her daughter. Almost nobody who destroys somebody is. That is the thing about the worst damage between people. It is almost never done by villains. It is done by the frightened, the frustrated, the ambitious, the people who cannot tell their own hunger from love, doing what the world around them says is the right and normal thing. And she did not win. That is the part people forget when they want her to be simply wicked. There is no version of this where Ethel comes out ahead. She poured her whole life into building her daughter into a star, and the star grew up and cut her off. She mishandled the fortune and lost it in a hole in the desert. She remarried and reached for a little happiness of her own, and her daughter despised her for it. And she ended not on a stage, not in a mansion, not basking in reflected glory, but on the payroll of an aircraft factory, checking parts, an aging clerk, and then dead on the cold concrete of the company parking lot on a January morning with nobody there. Still years from any reconciliation that was never going to come. The woman who spent her whole life trying to get close to the light died, as far from it as a person can get, alone between her car and her time clock. If she was a witch, she got no witch's ending. No throne, no power, no last laugh. She got a parking lot. There is no justice in that anyone should be glad about. There is only sadness, stacked on sadness, all the way down the line. So who is to blame if you have to settle it? The honest answer is that blame does not divide cleanly here, because the damage was a collaboration, and the collaborators included a frustrated mother, a ruthless studio, a whole industry, an entire era's idea of what a talented child was for, and underneath all of it, the same brutal fact that catches so many families in this story. The people who hurt Judy Garland loved a version of her. They loved the one on the stage. What none of them managed to do, not the mother, not the studio, not the husbands, not even fully the children who came later, was love the plain, ordinary, off-stage girl underneath, the one who was tired and hungry and frightened, and just wanted, like the character that made her famous, to go home. She spent her whole life singing for a love that would have been hers for free, if only one of the people in charge of her had known how to give it. To feel the whole of it, you have to leave the big words behind for a while and get down into the ordinary hours, because the damage was not done in one dramatic scene. It was done in the small, grinding texture of 1,000 days, most of which no one recorded, because there was nothing to record. It was just a childhood going by. Picture the road, the Garland sisters in a car, driving between one booking and the next across the flat brown country, north of Lowe's Angels and beyond. The mother at the wheel or beside it, the three girls in the back, the youngest asleep against the window or awake and quiet, watching the telephone poles go by. Picture a hotel at night, a cheap one, the kind that traveling acts could afford, the radiator ticking, the light coming under the door from the hallway. And picture, on the nights the mother needed the girls out of the way, or needed to teach the youngest something about who was in charge, a small child left alone in one of those rooms, while the world went on somewhere else without her, being left on purpose as a lesson. There are accounts of exactly that, the little girl alone in the hotel room, and you do not need a psychologist to tell you what a child learns in that room. She learns that her mother's presence is a thing that can be taken away, that closeness is conditional, that she can be set aside when she is not needed and picked back up when she is. She learns to earn her way back into the light of another person's attention. She learns it in the dark of a strange room, at an age when other children are being tucked in. Picture the wings of a theater, later that same tour. The child does not feel well. Her stomach hurts or her head, or she is simply the particular kind of tired that a body gets when it has been run too long on nerves and pills. She does not want to go out there. She wants, more than anything, to be small and sick and cared for, to have someone put a cool hand on her forehead and say, "Not tonight, sweetheart, tonight you can rest." And instead there is the mother, leaning down close so the audience cannot hear, with the voice she used for these moments, telling her to get out there and sing or be wrapped around the bedpost and broken off short. And the child, who has learned the lesson of the hotel room and the lesson of the encores and the lesson of every single day, does the only thing that works. She wipes her face and she walks out into the light, and she is wonderful, because being wonderful is the one reliable way to turn the threat back into love. And the audience out there in the dark has no idea. They see a bright, gifted little girl who seems to have been born happy. They cannot see the woman in the wings. They never can. That is the whole point of Wings. Picture the drive home after a triumph then, because this is where the deepest lesson lived. The show is over. The child was magnificent and the room stood up. And for those minutes on the stage, she was the most wanted creature on earth, filled up to the brim with the love pouring out of the dark. And then the lights come up and the crowd files out, and it is over, and she is put back in the car, and the car is quiet. The mother is counting the take, or thinking about the next booking, or simply tired. And the child sits in the back seat and feels the love draining out of her, like water out of a tub, because it was never hers to keep. It was rented for the length of a song, and now the song is over, and she is just a girl again in a quiet car, unwanted. Or so it feels until the next stage, the next room, the next chance to fill up again. And here is the contrast that makes it unbearable, the one that shows you the whole difference in that house. When Frank was near, there was another kind of welcome available to her, a kind that did not require a stage at all. He was glad to see her when she came in the door, glad in the plain way, glad she was there, not because she had just been wonderful for a paying crowd, but because she was his, because she existed, because it was her. A child can feel that difference the way she can feel warm and cold. With her father, being loved and being useful were two separate things, and the love came first and came free. With her mother, they were the same thing, and there was no love to be had. That had not first been earned under the lights. She had both parents in front of her, one offering love with no price on it, and one offering love with the highest price there is. And then the one with no price on it died when she was 13, and the only offer left on the table was her mother's. Sing for it or go without. She spent the rest of her life taking the only deal she had left. That is the mechanism. That is how a person is built to need an audience the way a body needs air, not through one cruelty, but through the daily rhythm of being adored under the lights, and going cold the moment the lights go down. Run that rhythm for a childhood, from before she could talk until she was signed at 13, and then hand the finished product to a studio that runs the exact same rhythm at 10 times the scale. And you do not get a person who has a problem with fame. You get a person who is fame, who has no self left that is separate from the performing, who genuinely does not know how to exist as an ordinary human being in a quiet room, because she was never once allowed to practice it. Judy Garland could hold a hall of thousands in the palm of her hand, and could not, at 3 in the morning, be alone with herself for 10 minutes without terror. Both of those facts have the same single cause, and the cause was set in the back seat of a car, and the dark of a hotel room, and the wings of 100 theaters, by a woman who called it keeping the girls going. There is a phrase one medical historian used for the whole long arc of it. Looking back with everything, we now understand about what happens to children who are used this way. He called it a slow suicide. It is a hard phrase and it is not quite fair, because suicide is a thing a person does to themselves, and this was done to a child who had no say in it. But it catches something true about the shape of the thing. What was done to Judy Garland, starting with her mother and finished by the studio, was not a single blow. It was a slow, patient, decades-long undoing, carried out mostly in plain sight, by people who called it love or called it business, or called it nothing at all because it was simply how things were done. Nobody stabbed her, nobody meant to end her. They just, over and over for 47 years, chose the performance over the person, the useful child over the real one, the star over the girl, until one night in London, the girl finally could not hold the star up anymore, and both of them went down together on a bathroom floor. Understood the modern way, with what we have learned since about children and the wounds they carry into adulthood, the story stops being mysterious and starts being almost predictable, which is its own kind of horror. Take a small child. Give her no reliable love that does not depend on her usefulness. Separate her from the parent who is soft toward her. Threaten her body when she resists. Put drugs in her before she is 10. Sell her childhood for the family's living. Do all of this, and the science of it says you will very likely get, in the adult, exactly what Judy became. The addiction, the bottomless anxiety, the certainty that her own body is wrong, the self-worth that lives entirely outside her, in the hands of audiences and lovers who can withdraw it at any second, the marriages that keep breaking on the same rock. None of it was a character flaw. None of it was weakness. It was the predictable harvest of a childhood engineered, mostly without malice, to produce a machine for making money and love out of a little girl. And it worked, and the machine ran beautifully, and the girl inside it never got to grow up. Which brings us back to the question of forgiveness, and to why Judy never gave it, and why you cannot quite blame her for that either. People love the idea of forgiveness. It makes a clean ending. The wrong child growing wise and letting the old hurt go. The mother forgiven, the circle closed. It almost never happens that way in real life, and it did not happen here. And the reason it did not is written all through that 1967 interview, in the thing that sat underneath the jokes. She could not forgive Ethel because she had never gotten free of her. Forgiveness is a thing you do from a distance. Once the danger is past, once the other person has become a memory you can hold at arm's length and finally set down. But Ethel was never a memory Judy could hold at arm's length. Ethel was inside her, permanent, the voice that told her she was only worth something on the stage, the hand that had first given her the pills, the whole architecture of her fear. You cannot forgive the walls of your own house. They are not out there where forgiveness can reach them. They are the thing you are standing inside. When Judy joked about her mother's ghost knocking her earring from beyond the grave, she was telling the literal truth of her inner life. The mother was still in the room. The mother was always in the room. She had made sure of it back at the beginning by getting there first. And there was one more thing that made forgiveness impossible, and it is the cruelest knot in the whole story. Ethel had given her the one thing she could never give back and could never stop being grateful for, which was the gift itself, the talent, the stage, the voice that made the whole world love her, Judy Garland's entire identity, the thing that made her Judy Garland and not some forgotten woman named Frances Gum, came out of the same hands that had done the damage. She could not simply throw her mother away, because to throw her mother away would be to throw away the source of everything she was. The applause she needed like air, Ethel had first taught her to earn. The voice the world worshipped, Ethel had first drilled on a staircase landing in Minnesota. She owed her mother her whole self, the ruined parts and the glorious parts alike. And you cannot cleanly hate a person you owe your whole self to, and you cannot cleanly love a person who broke you. And so, you are left exactly where Judy was left, telling jokes about a ghost, scolding a dead woman for tugging your ear, calling her wicked and laughing so you do not do the other thing. She went to the funeral in 1953 on that January day, and she stood at the grave at Forest Lawn, where they put Ethel down near Frank, the soft father and the hard mother in the same ground at last, and whatever she felt standing there, she mostly kept to herself. There is no record of a great scene, no collapse, no speech. Just a famous daughter at her estranged mother's funeral, doing the thing you do, and then leaving, and going back to a life that her mother had built and broken in equal measure, carrying the woman with her the way she would carry her to the end, which was another 16 years down the road. In London, with a bottle of the pills her mother's kind of thinking had first put in her hand. You want there to be a moment where it all resolves. There isn't one. That is the honest shape of this particular kind of damage. It does not resolve. It just gets carried by the person it was done to until they cannot carry it anymore. You remember the first time you saw her, probably, even if you cannot pin down the year. Most people who love her do. Maybe it was the little farm girl in the black and white part of the film, before the door opens onto color, singing about a place over the rainbow with her whole small heart, and something in your chest went tight without your permission. Maybe it was later, an older Judy, a concert Judy, a woman in a spotlight in a dark theater or on a television screen, in your family's living room, holding a note until it seemed she would break, and not breaking, and you understood that you were watching someone give away more of herself than a performer is supposed to have to give. Whenever it was, the thing that got you was never just the skill, though the skill was enormous. It was the ache underneath. You could hear that she meant it. You could hear that the longing in the songs was not an act. Now you know where the ache came from, and it changes how you hear her, and it should. That catch in the voice, the thing that made her the most emotionally naked singer of her whole century. The reason grown men wept in the aisles at her concerts and still weep at the recordings today. That was not a technique she learned. That was the wound singing. Every time Judy Garland reached for a note about home, or love, or being wanted, she was reaching for something real that she had never been given and never stopped needing. And the audience could feel the truth of it because it was true. The gift and the injury were the same sound. When people say no one has ever sung like that since, part of what they are hearing without knowing it is a childhood. They are hearing what her mother did to her, turned into music, offered up to strangers in a dark room in exchange for the only love she ever really trusted. That is the strange, bitter arithmetic at the center of her, and there is no way around it, and it does no good to pretend otherwise. If Ethel had been a gentle mother, a protective one, the kind who put a cool hand on a sick child's forehead and said, "Not tonight," we may never have gotten the Judy Garland we got. The wound is in the voice. Take away the wound, and you might take away the thing that makes it unbearable and unforgettable. This is the part that no one likes to say, because it sounds like it is excusing the harm, and it is not excusing anything. It is just refusing to lie about the cost. The world received an extraordinary gift, and the price of that gift was the ruin of the person who carried it. And the person who carried it did not get a vote, and did not get to keep the love the gift earned her, and died young and frightened with a bottle of pills. And the gift lives on, immortal more than half a century later, still making strangers cry. That is not a happy trade, but it is the trade that was made over her head when she was too young to refuse it. And we are all, every one of us who has ever loved that voice, standing on the near side of it, holding the beautiful thing that cost her everything. There are two Judy Garlands in the world's memory, and they have never quite been reconciled. And now you can see that they were never two people at all. There is the joyful one, the girl next door, Dorothy in the gingham, the wholesome sweetheart of the backyard musicals, the smile, the pluck, the little voice that seemed made out of pure gladness. And there is the tragic one, the addiction and the breakdowns and the marriages and the sad early end, the cautionary tale, the woman the world watched fall in slow motion for 30 years. People tend to hold these two apart, the bright one and the broken one, as if the sad ending betrayed the happy girl, as if something went wrong along the way. Nothing went wrong along the way. The bright one and the broken one were the same child from the very start, made by the same hands, in the same wings on the same stages. The gladness was always the performance the wound required. She was never two people. She was one girl, forever singing for a love she had been taught she had to earn. And the singing was so beautiful that we mistook it for happiness. And it was really the sound of someone trying, with everything she had, to finally be allowed to come home. It is worth trying at least once, to see the whole thing from inside Ethel, not to excuse her, but because a story with a cardboard villain in it is a lie, and this story is too important to lie about. So go back one more time, all the way back, before the pills and the threats in the parking lot, to the plain, stubborn girl at the piano in the dark of a superior movie house, 20 years old, playing the world into being for other people's stories. She wanted it too. That is the thing you have to hold on to. Ethel wanted the light, every bit as badly as Judy would, wanted it in her bones, and the difference was only that Ethel was never going to get it, and she knew it, probably long before she would ever admit it out loud. She could sing a little. She could not sing like the ones who made it. She was plain in a business that ran on beauty, and she was ordinary in a family full of better voices. And she had spent her whole young life being just good enough to stay near the stage, and never good enough to stand on it. Imagine carrying that. Imagine loving something with your whole self, and knowing it will never love you back the way you need. And then imagine giving birth to it. Imagine that the thing you wanted to be, the star, the voice, the one the crowd adores, comes out of your own body, small and dark-eyed and impossibly gifted, and looks up at you and calls you mother. What would you do? A better person, a whole person, would step back and let the child be a child and be glad. But Ethel was not whole. She was hungry, and she had been hungry her whole life. And here at last was the feast, except the feast was her daughter. She could not tell where her love for Judy ended, and her hunger for the stage began, because to her they were one feeling, one warmth, one drive. When she pushed Judy out under the lights, some part of her was pushing herself out under the lights, finally, at last, through the only door that would ever open for her. When the crowd loved Judy, some part of Ethel felt loved. She was not living beside her daughter's fame. She was living inside it, feeding on it, the only way she was ever going to taste the thing she had wanted since she was a girl at the piano in the dark. That is not an excuse. It is worse than an excuse. It is a reason. And reasons are what make the whole thing human and unbearable at once. Because you cannot hate a hungry person the clean way you can hate a monster. You can only look at them and understand. And understanding does not undo a single day of the harm. If Ethel could have told her own version, and she never really got to, she probably would not have understood the accusation at all. She would have said she did everything for those girls. She would have said she gave up her own chances to give them theirs. She would have said she kept them fed through the worst years the country ever had, that she opened the doors, that she made the calls and drove the miles, and sat at the piano through 10,000 shows, that without her, there would have been no Judy Garland at all, just a Frances Gum nobody ever heard of. And every word of that would have been true. It would also have missed the entire point, the way people who do this kind of harm always miss it, because the harm was never in what she did for Judy. The harm was in what she could not do, which was love the girl for nothing, love her off the stage, love her tired and plain and useless, love her the way Frank did, the easy way, the free way, the only way that would have built a floor under her. Ethel gave her daughter the whole world. She just never gave her the one thing underneath the world. And you cannot stand on the world without it, and Judy never could. For those of us who watched it happen, and a great many of you did, the strange thing is how long it took the world to understand any of this. In her own lifetime, the fall looked like a personal failing. The papers called her unreliable, difficult, washed up, then miraculous again, then washed up again, a woman who kept squandering her own gifts, who could not get out of her own way. The public watched her come apart across the variety shows, and the gossip columns and the concert reviews, the triumphs and the cancellations, the wait up and down, the marriages beginning and ending, and most of the watching came wrapped in a faint disapproval, as if she were doing all of this to herself, as if a woman that loved and that gifted had no excuse for being that unwell. The truth that it had all been set in motion before she could read, by a mother in the wings, and a studio in Culver City, was there the whole time in plain sight, in her own interviews, in the bedpost story she told on national television, and still the world mostly heard a colorful anecdote instead of a confession. It is easier now from a distance to see the machine for what it was. We know more than they knew then, about what happens to a child who is used this way, about how the harm settles in and waits and comes due decades later, about how addiction is not a moral weakness, but very often the long echo of an early wound. Looking back across the whole arc, from the 2-year-old in the white net dress to the woman on the London bathroom floor, the shape is not mysterious anymore, and it is not shameful, and it was never her fault. She did not fall. She was dropped early by the people who were supposed to hold her, and she spent the rest of her life in the air, and she sang the whole way down, and the singing was so beautiful we forgot she was falling. There is a temptation, having learned all this, to reach for the simple version and call it a day. Wicked mother, ruined daughter, the end. But you have seen by now that the simple version does a disservice to both of them. It flattens Judy into a victim, when she was also right to the end, one of the great forces of nature the stage has ever known, funny and warm and blazingly alive. A woman her own children remember laughing as much as crying, and it flattens Ethel into a witch, when she was a frightened, frustrated, ambitious woman who loved her daughter in the broken only way she had, and who did not win, and who died alone on the asphalt reaching for a light that was never going to shine on her. The simple version is comfortable because it lets us pick a side. The true version does not let you pick a side. It just asks you to look at two people caught in the same trap. The mother who could not give what she had never received, and the daughter who could not receive what she was finally, too late, offered. Both of them singing for a love that was standing right there the whole time. If only anyone had known how to simply hand it over. That is the real story the title was pointing at. Not a single terrible act. A whole inheritance of hunger, passed from a plain girl at a piano to a gifted girl in the wings and on. We should be honest, at least partway into the next generation after that. What Ethel did to Judy was worse than you think, because it was not a thing she did once. It was a thing she was, handed down, the way these things are always handed down, from the people who were starved to the people they raise. There is a line at the end of the movie that everyone knows. The one the good witch tells Dorothy when the little girl is desperate to get back to the farm, back to the aunt and uncle, back to the ordinary gray world. She had spent the whole picture wishing she could escape, and now would give anything to reach. You had the power all along, the good witch says. Just close your eyes, click the heels of the ruby slippers together, and say the words. There's no place like home. And Dorothy does, and it works. And she wakes up in her own bed with the people who love her leaning over her. And the storm is past, and she is safe. Think about the child who was made to say those words. She said there's no place like home into a camera, over and over, on a soundstage in Culver City. A strapped-down, underfed, chemically managed 16-year-old. And there was no place like home for her, because there was no home for her at all. There was a mother she was already half estranged from in her heart, a dead father 2 years in the ground, a hometown 1,000 miles away that she had left when she was 4, and a studio that owned her waking hours and called her a hunchback. She had no farm to click her heels back to. The most homesick line in American movies was spoken by a girl who had nowhere to go. And the terrible joke of the ruby slippers, the power you had all along, was that she did not have it. There were no magic shoes for Judy. There was no set of words that would carry her back to safety, because the safety had never existed in the first place. She could sing the wish more beautifully than anyone who ever lived, and the wish would never come true, because you cannot go home to a place that was never built. That is what makes her performance in that film almost too much to bear once you know the whole story. She is not acting a little girl who wants to go home. She is a little girl who wants to go home, and cannot and knows it, and is being paid to pretend that a pair of shoes could fix it. The longing is real, the home is not, and she poured that exact gap, the size of the distance between how badly she needed a home and how completely she lacked one, into a song and a film that would comfort children for the next century, promise them in her own aching voice that there is always somewhere over the rainbow, that you always have the power to get back, that home is always there waiting. She gave the whole world the comfort she was never given. That was her gift in the end, and it was made out of her wound. The way all of it was made out of her wound. She sang the promise she needed most and never received. And she sang it so truly that we believed it. And it saved a lot of us on a lot of hard nights. And it could not save her, because she was the one it was lying to. So go back one last time to where we started, to the green witch on the screen with her broom and her cackle, the one every child learned to fear from the safe side of the living room, the one who wanted the girl's power and chased her across a painted world and melted at the end so everyone could go home. That witch was easy. That witch was a story. She had a beginning and a middle and an end, and the end was safe, and the credits rolled, and the real world came back on around you, warm and solid and fine. The other witch, the real one, the one Judy said was standing in the wings the whole time, never melted. She did not get an ending you could feel safe about. She got a parking lot in Santa Monica on a January morning, alone, between her car and a factory door. A lonely, ordinary, unglamorous death for a woman who had wanted glamour her whole life and never once been given it, not the real kind, not for herself. She never got the light. She only ever got to stand next to it, in the wings, watching her daughter have the thing she could not have, and calling that watching love, because it was the closest thing to love she knew how to feel. If you went looking for a villain to hate cleanly, you would not find her there. You would find a woman as hungry and as unloved as the daughter she starved. A woman who had also once been a little girl who was only good enough to stay near the stage and never good enough to stand on it, passing her own emptiness down to the one person who trusted her most. And the child, go back to the child, the 2-year-old in the white net dress her mother had sewn, up on the stage of her father's theater the day after Christmas in 1924, singing Jingle Bells to a little crowd of neighbors in a small cold town at the top of the map. She would not leave. They loved her and she sang it again. And they loved her again and she sang it again. And she kept going, chorus after chorus, until her father had to walk out of the wings and pick her up and carry her off. While she was still singing, still reaching for the sound of them wanting her, everyone laughed. It was the sweetest thing they had ever seen. And it was, though not one soul in that theater could have known it. The whole of her life already written in a single moment. The first and last time it would ever be that simple. A child so filled up by love that a grown man had to carry her away from the source of it. She spent the next 45 years trying to get carried off that stage again, into arms that were glad to have her whether she sang or not. She never was. She kept walking back out into the lights instead, because the lights were the only place she had ever been sure of. And she gave everything she had out there, more than a body can give. And the people in the dark loved her the way she had always needed to be loved, for the length of a song, and then the song would end. And the lights would come up, and she would be alone again in the quiet. A girl in the back of a car, a woman in a dressing room, a mother in a rented London house, waiting to be wanted, running the whole thing down through the pills her mother's kind of thinking had first put in her hand. Until one night, the pills did the last thing pills do, and she did not wake up, and the singing finally stopped. At 47, 2 weeks past her birthday, half a world away from the little white house with the garden, where somebody had once been glad to hear her voice come up the staircase. They are both gone now, the mother and the daughter, the witch in the wings and the girl in the light, buried in the same ground where Frank went first. The whole strange family finally still. The theaters they played in have mostly been torn down or turned into something else. The studio that broke her has passed through 100 hands. The little white house in Minnesota became a museum, so that people can stand in the rooms where a family once sang on the staircase and try to feel the happy years, the terribly happy years, the only carefree time she ever had, before the door closed on all of it when she was 4. What is left is the voice. That is the thing that survives, and it is worth being clear-eyed about what it is, now that you know where it came from. When you put on one of those old recordings, or watch her hold a note in a grainy clip, until it seems the note is holding her up, you are not just hearing a great singer. You are hearing a whole life, the whole inheritance, the plain hungry girl in Superior, and the frightened girl in the wings, and the strapped-down girl on the soundstage, and the falling woman on the stage in New York. All of it, turned into sound and handed to you across the decades. You are hearing what her mother did to her, and what the studio did to her, and what she did with it, which was the most anyone could have done, which was to make it beautiful, to take the worst thing that ever happened to her and turn it into the thing that would make strangers love her, long after everyone who ever hurt her was dust. It would be a comfort to say she found peace somewhere, that the last years softened, that she forgave her mother and made a kind of home at the end. She did not really, and it does no honor to her to pretend otherwise. But there is a truth here that is not comfort and is better than comfort, and it is this: the love she spent her whole life trying to earn, the love that had to be sung for, the love that came and went with the lights. She finally has it now, and she has it for free, and she has it in the plain, unconditional way she was never once given while she was alive. The people in the dark still love her. They love her tired, and they love her failing, and they love her at the very end, when the voice was frayed and the body was giving out. They love the whole of her, the broken parts and the glorious parts, the girl and the ruin, all of it, no performance required. She does not have to sing for it anymore. It just comes and keeps coming, from strangers who never met her, more than a century after she stopped being able to feel it. She thought the only time she was wanted was when she was on the stage. She was wrong. She just did not live to find out. The wanting she needed her whole life was always going to arrive. It simply arrived late, the way it so often does, after the person who needed it most is past being able to hold it, offered up now by all of us who close our eyes, when that voice reaches for a place over the rainbow, and understand at last that the girl singing it never had a home to go back to.